KGNU on the fourth Thursday of November. So I'll say some things in the middle here as if we're on the air live, because that's how our audience will be hearing us. But I think we'll go ahead and start, and I'll introduce the panel. Are we all good, Matt, back there?
Yeah.
Okay. So welcome to the Collaborative Community Radio Show. I'm your host, Ken Miller, and tonight we have the privilege of hearing from a group of panelists speaking on the issue of housing availability and the criminalization of homelessness. So just by way of introduction, you may or may not be aware that the Department of Justice and Housing and Urban Development have recently declared camping bans and other quality of life and anti-vagrancy laws a violation of the Eighth Amendment's cruel and unusual punishment clause. And so part of the reason for this topic is, like a lot of communities, we work hard to balance as a community, keeping people out of homelessness, but as you're well aware, there's housing availability and affordable housing are very broad macro issues that touch a much wider group of people than just those who are homeless. But the reality is you can find yourself in a criminalized state when there are things like camping bans. And so this topic and this subject will go well beyond camping bans. But the idea is, as we are working together as a community and the various service providers and policymakers to address this issue, how do we handle the issue of people becoming criminalized simply because of their state of housing and the stuff they have to do to live. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of our panelists, and then I will allow them to, before they do their presentation, give a little more in-depth introduction of themselves and talk about any other particular connections to this topic and issue. So we are pleased to have with us today Leanne Wheeler, who's the Vice President for Metro Denver Homeless Coalition and Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. David Harrison is a Boulder defense attorney who has worked on the issue of supporting unhoused people in relationship to the camping ban and has taken cases all the way to the Colorado Supreme Court on that issue. Professor Nantia Ruan, Professor of the Practice of Law at the University of Denver, Sturm College of Law, where she teaches the Homeless Advocacy Policy Seminar. And one of her students, Ellie Zweibel, is here, and he'll be able to make some comments too. So let me start off by asking David if you would just take a couple minutes and give maybe a little fuller introduction of yourself and your interest and connection to this topic and issue, and just your thoughts for us here this evening. So thanks, David.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm David Harrison. I'm a criminal defense attorney here in Boulder, so there's no doubt that will color my views of what I talk about, so be aware of that. I've been practicing law here for 33 years, and in 2009 became aware of a group of homeless people who were, I guess it's safe to say, upset with the camping ban, didn't feel that it was right, and they actually organized themselves and started defending themselves in court. And when I became aware of that, I asked some people that were connected with them whether they might like to have a lawyer, and some did, some didn't. And so I started representing people that were charged with camping because they weren't qualifying for court-appointed counsel because they weren't realistically facing going to jail. I partnered, recognizing after a short time that it was a rather big project. I partnered with the Legal Aid and Defender program at the CU Law School, which is CU Law students who are able to practice under the license of a professor. And so, so we now, for the last 5 or 6 years, have been handling those cases, either myself or the students or a combination of both. There were times when there were so many trials set that the court was setting up 2 separate courtrooms. And so sometimes I would be able to supervise one of the students doing a trial, or I would do a trial and the professor would supervise others. So what I was hoping to start out by doing was to explain what the camping ordinance in Boulder is, so that everyone's on the same page on that. So Boulder has a camping ordinance that is 5-6-10. It's actually entitled Camping or Lodging on Property Without Consent. You know, we've looked into when the ordinance was originally passed, and it's a little hard for me, at least, to figure that out, but it looks like maybe 1989 is when it was originally passed. It prohibits people from conducting activities of daily living, like eating or sleeping, at night, which is defined as from dusk until 1 hour after sunrise, as reflected in the Nautical Almanac. But it prohibits people from eating or sleeping at night when they are residing or dwelling temporarily in a place with shelter. Shelter is defined as anything other than clothing. So if you think through all that, the short version is what's against the law is to be asleep with a blanket or a sleeping bag. And it has to be without permission. So, for example, if a person is on University of Colorado property, the prosecution has to prove as a part of their case that the person didn't have permission to be there, to sleep there. When we started fighting this ordinance, it read that you couldn't sleep with shelter on city property unless you had a permit. And so we actually sent some people to the city manager's office to follow the process to get a permit. It turned out that there was not a process to get a permit, and so people were told, well, come back with what you think is an appropriate way to ask for a permit. And in the time frame that we were working on that, the city council changed the ordinance and got rid of the ability to get to sleep on city property at all. There's not a way, the ordinance doesn't allow for there to be permission to sleep on city property at this point. You can defend yourself against that statute by saying it was a necessity that I do this, or the choice, you use the choice of evils defense, which is there's a whole series of things you have to show, but essentially that there wasn't another realistic choice than sleeping out. So what we find is in Boulder, where there is no shelter in the summer, the homeless shelter closes, as most of you probably know, in, I'm forgetting right now, but April or May for the summer, and then it opens again in mid-October. Boho, which is the backup, I could call it the backup shelter, in the various faith-based communities, operates generally the same time frame. And so during the summer months, there's really not a legal place to go to sleep, with some exceptions. Some of the faith-based communities now open their facilities in the summer to select groups of people. So the short version of that is if we can show to the court that the temperature was 40 or below, with precipitation maybe a little higher than that, and that there weren't any other realistic other alternatives, then the court will allow us to defend ourselves by claiming that we had to choose between two evils, either break the law, i.e. pull a blanket over ourselves, or, you know, we would get hypothermia or other things like that. So, so there's a hearing prior to the trial when we present information to the court about what the circumstances were that night, and the judge decides whether we're allowed to use the choice of evils defense. If we are, then essentially what we're doing is we're admitting we broke the law, but we had to, because otherwise we would suffer this injury. And what we found in the many trials we've done, I quit keeping count, frankly, but is that we often win when we get to use the choice of evils defense, and we often lose when we don't. Tom Carr stated at a city council meeting fairly recently that his prosecutors lose about half of the camping cases. When I was keeping track, there was a point when I did the statistics, and about 78% of the camping cases we were handling were either dismissed by the prosecutor because they knew they couldn't prove them, or we won a trial. I've got a little, this will work really good on radio. I have a photograph, which is an actual photograph from a case. It shows three men sleeping. This happens to be down near the creek. One is sleeping in the foreground in a sleeping bag, a green sleeping bag. One is sleeping in the background, partway in a grayish type of bag. And the gentleman in the middle is sleeping with his backpack under his head, in a coat and pants. And what he has over his feet is a t-shirt. We tried these cases, went to trial on these cases. The two men on each side were found guilty, and the man in the middle was found not guilty, because the man in the middle was just using clothes. Because again, remember, you can't sleep with shelter, and shelter is defined as anything except clothing. And what the court ruled was that you didn't have to be wearing the clothing as clothing has to be, or is normally worn. It just has to be clothing. So a t-shirt over your feet is clothing, but so you're not breaking the law. My question for the powers that be was, what different impact are these three people having that's trying to be avoided? If the issue is sanitation, they're all in the same position. If the issue is unsightliness, the guy in the middle isn't particularly more attractive than the ones in the sleeping bag. So I think this picture really points up sort of, oh, I had it upside down, the absurdity of the law, in my way of thinking. So we do the jury trials. I view it as educating older citizens, 3 or 6 at a time, including the jury selection process, maybe 30 at a time. I will say that I don't want to go in much longer, but that the response from the city prosecutor's office has varied over time. There was a time when, in response to the number of trials that were happening, they modified the way they made offers, and there was a time when, if it was your first camping ticket and you came to court, I'll come back to that in a minute, that they would make a deal with you that if you went to Bridge House, learned about services that were available, and did that within a certain couple of week time period, that then they dismiss the case against you. I'll tell you that if we go to trial and lose, or if a client pleads guilty, it's pretty typical, depending on the number of prior cases they've had, that they get something like 5 hours of community service work or 8 hours of community service work or something between July 1st of 2014 and July 30th of 2015, so just this last year, there were 371 camping ordinance violation tickets written. The challenge that we find is that of those 371 tickets, 251 of the individuals failed to appear in court. So then they get a warrant, and they're contacted again, they get arrested on the warrant, they go to jail. Municipal court goes to the jail on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 11:45. So if you get arrested at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, you're in jail for 3 days. And you go to court, and they usually say, okay, time served, and you get out, or you can fight the ticket, and we can set the trial in 2 months. And you can wait in custody during that time. So anyway, with that, I'm just going to wrap up, and certainly there's plenty more to say, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Thanks.
And you are listening to KGNU Boulder, Denver. We're having a forum in Boulder on the topic of housing availability and the criminalization of homelessness. And you're listening to David Harrison, an attorney who has been representing those who've been recipients of camping tickets. And David, before we pass it on to Leon, just one quick follow-up. Speak a little bit about what is the cumulative effect for those who may have received more than one camping citation and perhaps missed their court date and maybe not have something on their record, and how that kind of identifies them or takes them down a path towards identification as a criminal.
Sure. Well, I mean, the first challenge is, of course, that you've got to make it to court. The way, if you set a jury trial, there's the jury trial date, but prior to the jury trial date is a jury readiness date. Sometimes you have 2 of those if your trial gets continued. And so just keeping track of when you need to be places. But as far as sort of the stigma that's attached, I mean, it does give you on some level a criminal record for a municipal ordinance violation. And certainly the failure to appears are very important in my experience to judges later if there's some other charges or even an additional camping charge. The bonds get set higher, and there's usually more supervision while you're on bond, that kind of thing. So it certainly does have that challenge. Plus, if you actually end up failing to appear and get arrested, then of course the police have to do something with your stuff, and they take your stuff, and even though it's not evidence, they will hold it, but they only hold it for a period of time. And there are people who are in custody longer than that period of time, so then their stuff gets destroyed. In their stuff was their ID. That starts a whole process of challenges for unhoused people.
Thank you, David. And for those of you who may be listening in Denver, this is an issue that obviously plays out in both Denver and Boulder, and they're similar but differing ordinances and practices in the 2 areas. So we're pleased to have Leanne Wheeler here, who is the Vice President of Metro Denver Homeless Initiative. And Leanne, tell us a little bit more about how you got connected to this subject matter and topic and your interests and passions around it, and then lead us into kind of your thoughts on the topic tonight.
My privilege. Thank you for the honor of being here this evening. I'm Leanne Wheeler, and I am a formerly homeless veteran. And so I will leave that to come back to after a while. I served this great country in the Desert Storm era in the United States Air Force, went directly into aerospace. I'm a software engineer by discipline and hold a number of credentials, in fact. In that time of my life, I was serving voluntarily in leadership of a street ministry, a homeless ministry for Rising Star Missionary Baptist Church in Denver, Colorado, with a very limited understanding of where people were coming from and where they were going when they left our ministry, our 2-hour window. And so I found that to be heartbreaking. And so I found my way after what I consider to be an expansion of my humanity in being homeless from December of 2008 until March of 2010, my humanity was expanded. And I found myself serving with the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative. I'm also privileged to serve on the board of directors for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and formerly served with the Dolores Project. And so because I come from industry and engineering, it made sense to me to serve with a convening body, which is the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative. As a continuum of care, there are 80 plus organizations who work in this space. Two of those organizations, Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, also leads a balance of state continuum of care. And the Dolores Project is a shelter for women. I did have a bed at that particular shelter as a female veteran. And so I've had the honor of serving in these spaces. The message that I bring to the conversation, and I'm very excited to explore this as a community, is that we have two other areas that are under resourced. That would be the faith community. So I'm very excited to be here convening this discussion in a house of faith. And the second under resourced industry is private sector business. These are two entities who have discretionary funds, as it were, that they can deploy any way they choose. We have relied heavily on governments, and it is certainly critical to have a benevolent government. And so such ordinances that have come to pass with regard to the camping ban and those types of things, although look to business in support of business, have an air of a lack of benevolence. And so in my role with the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative and that continuum of care, HUD is using the continuum to filter some $20 million with two organizations who are seeing to the needs of the least of these, the homeless community. And in that capacity, MDHI does not take a position on policy. Their job is to convene those organizations who do this work and who are also free to take positions on policy. And so Colorado Coalition for the Homeless is one such organization. They have, in fact, spoken out against the camping ban in Denver, for instance. And so what we're finding this year with the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative and the HUD funding is that there, for the first time, there is a look to those types of benevolent governance ordinances as it relates to assigning money to organizations in support of these communities. And so for the first time, HUD is taking a look at such things as camping bans and such things as ordinances that don't support the humanity or the basic human needs of humanity. It's, I think, an exciting time in that it puts the money, puts the talk in the walk, as it were. HUD has been indicating for a few years now that they would be looking to do something like this. And so just now, it counts for about 2% of funding that can be allocated to any given organization within the continuum, but that's a start. And these organizations in particular, organizations with a strong voice, strong policy reach, are being very ardent and adamant about ensuring that number cranks up, ticks up a bit, and that it's in fact putting pressure on governments to be the support and enable function it is to be in the light of benevolence. And so it's an exciting time for me personally, for my experience, and me professionally in the work that I get to do in my humanity, that we're taking a look at it this way now. And so I look forward to answering any questions that I can in regard to those two things. And so briefly, I enjoyed a very long and lucrative career in aerospace. It's the business of war. We are a country of national defense, and I know that there are folks who feel a certain way about that. But in so doing, my service in the Air Force, I moved in continuation of that work in the aerospace industry. And so I spent a number of years in that industry until the economic downturn of '08, where a lot of uh, upper level executives and middle management and those folks who have moved away from a discipline found themselves with a pink slip. And I fell into that lot. And it happened to me while I was working on a short-term assignment in Massachusetts, where they have a different take on homelessness, and the partnership between faith, business, and government was a strong collaboration. And so I volunteered in that space with the hope that, well, certainly not with the expectation that I would be laid off there, but with an understanding that that partnership can work. And so when I was laid off, I made the decision to come back to Colorado, as it had been my home for a number of years before I took that one-year assignment. And much to my surprise, as a homeless veteran, I was astonished to learn about some of the shortcomings with regard to the services that were available to me. Now, I will say that I had the privilege of understanding, having written grants and government grants, that there are requirements and there are certain criteria that have to be met, and you have to pay attention to the color of money. So that's my capital background and teeth talking. So I understood that piece. When it came to compassion industry, I was thrown by how regimented we were still looking to identify this criteria around humanity and what one might need versus what someone else might need. And a decision was made that we all need more or less what was being offered by the nonprofit that I was accessing at the time. And so it also put me in a position to understand that we don't look to business and we don't look to faith to partner in this work. That we have over time, and I was reading a book called The Tragedy of American Compassion, and the author now escapes me.
Marvin Olasky.
Yes, we talked about this. And so I thought, this is in fact when we, as a society, look to government to solve all of our social ills. This was written about the Great Depression, when faith was broke, business was broke, everyone was broke but government. And so we all aligned our eyes to government to see to our basic human needs. And it would seem that we've not stopped looking to government to solve this problem. And it's you don't get what you need if you don't include the other two legs of the stool. And so I had an opportunity to do some research for I-990s. It was the tax year 2013. In the 7 metro counties here in the Denver metro, there are 3,000 plus churches. And those 3,000 plus churches in 2013 filed a collective 990 of $3 billion. $1 billion of that was cash, and the other $2 billion of that was in kind. So that looks like donations, volunteer hours at $22 an hour, and some other fancy math. And so I have an accountant. And so I know that my accountant is looking at where we might make some concessions or where certain things may apply to me. And so when I think about the $1 billion cash number and even the $2 billion in kind number, I wonder what really went unreported and what we really have access to. And in working with a handful of churches before my own homeless experience and then another handful after, knowing that most churches have about a $5,000 cap on their ministries for homelessness or their ministries for incarceration, or it's about a $5,000 cap before they don't feel uncomfortable going to the trustees to ask for more money. And so when I got to thinking about those things, I thought, oh, wow, we are in fact under-resourced. And in light of the tragedy of American compassion, the church itself is looking for government to fund this work. And I know this through conversations I've had with certain pastors in the Denver metro area. Does the governor's office have a grant? Does this entity have a grant? No, but you do pass a plate 4 times a weekend. You have the money. What you don't have is the will. And so we need to have a conversation around will. With regard to the private sector, part of the concessions any business, in particular a business that's publicly traded, makes in going into a community is that they will in fact be a good community partner. And so that might look like buying a table at an event. That might look like setting up a program that has mentoring with at-risk kids. There are a number of different, very creative, very agile and nimble ways for any business to become a good community partner. What hasn't happened is that we've asked in the compassion industry a business to do. And then in asking, understand why it is they are incentivized to do. And so we, I think, as in the compassion industry, have to get to a place where we can speak business and understand what's in it for the business to honor their community involvement commitment to the city that they've landed in. And so I think there's an opportunity to create dialogue, in particular with community, around how best to do that. And so, again, I'm excited to be here. I am thrilled in anticipation of what questions we might be asked. And I'll be here as long as you need me to be. Thank you.
Thank you. You're listening to KGNU Boulder, Denver, and that was Leanne Wheeler, one of our panelists on the forum that we're conducting right now on housing availability and the criminalization of homelessness. And my apologies, I failed to mention in my earlier introductions that we also are joined on our panel this evening by Sam Weaver from the Boulder City Council. So he'll be rounding out the discussion here in a few moments here. But I'd like now to introduce Professor Nantia Ruan, and I'll let you show the introduction, Ellie, when you find it appropriate. But give us, just as Leanne and David did, maybe a little deeper look into how you got to the work that you're doing now and how it relates to this topic. Welcome.
Sure. Thank you, Ken. So I'm Nantia Ruan, professor of the practice of law at the University of Denver, Stern College of Law. I'm here with two of my students, three law students, Ellie Zweibel and Allie Moore, who's here. Thank you for having us. We got involved in this project. I'll describe the project a bit, but we got involved through the Western Regional Advocacy Project, WRAP. And they're the authors of the Homeless Bill of Rights, and they've been working tirelessly in the Western states to get the Homeless Bill of Rights passed in different states. There was a big push last year to get it passed, and unfortunately did not, but we're hopeful that it will get passed next year. And the advocacy groups that came together to try and get this passed were really concerned because some of the pushback they got from the state legislators is that they questioned whether or not this is really needed. Do homeless people actually need these sort of protections and these rights? Because really, what sort of ordinances are really out there and how are they enforced? Because even if there's some laws on the books, it doesn't really mean they're being enforced. And so without that data, their efforts were stymied. And so they came to the advocacy groups, went to different law schools to talk about whether or not we could do a research study to take a look at the ordinances on the books and to get a survey of the number of them, the increasing enforcement of them, and do records requests underneath the open records laws to find out the number of citations that were actually handed out underneath these ordinances. That happened in California with Berkeley Law. It happened in Washington State with Seattle University College of Law. And now it's happening in Colorado, thanks to my students at the University of Denver Stern College of Law. And so we embarked on this project with our Homeless Advocacy Policy Seminar, where 11 law students surveyed all of the different ordinances in 76 cities in Colorado. We chose these 76 cities because they are the most populous, and it was a good sort of overview look at the different jurisdictions to see what laws are on the books that affect the homeless people in Colorado. So looking at those 76 cities, which represents roughly 2/3 of the population of Colorado, the students looked at all of their city codes and looked to see what ordinances actually disproportionately affect the homeless citizens of Colorado. And so what they did is they took a look at these ordinances, including the camping ban, and the criteria they used by which to choose an ordinance to put in our survey was whether or not it disproportionately affected the homeless and either seemed to be written intended to target the homeless or affected a life activity, such as sitting, lying, urinating. And so we identified those. We found over 400 ordinances in just those 76 cities that that seem to target the homeless in Colorado. Specific to Boulder, Ellie's Weibel's going to talk about what we found there, but I'll mention that there seem to be about 9 ordinances in Boulder that affect 9 categories of behavior. The camping ban is just one of them. We also have ordinances in Boulder that target staying on medians, aggressive begging, begging in certain places, public urination, trespassing on public property, obstructing public streets, which includes sitting on sidewalks, living in vehicles, and smoking in public. So, which you might think that seems sort of general, but from our understanding, many of those were cited under the smoking in public are homeless in Boulder. So of those 9 ordinances and 9 categories of behavior, we see a number of citations. And what the students did after cataloging all of this is they did open record requests under the Colorado Open Records Request Act. For these different jurisdictions, sent letters asking for the number of citations that were handed out per these ordinances, as well as the number of what the fines were for those and for those that were given citations, how many were homeless or transient. And so we're collecting that data now. It's an ongoing project. Our hope is that by the end of 2015, early 2016, we will publish a policy report to help support the Homeless Bill of Rights that will show that the enforcement of these ordinances is severe, it's significant, it's not nominal. You heard from David about the trial end of that. We are looking at the early end of these enforcements, of the citation, move along orders, and the ways that these ordinances actually criminalize homelessness. And so Ellie's Weibel is going to talk a little bit about what we found specific to Boulder.
Thank you very much, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here, so thank you for including me. So specific to Boulder, we do have data that's rolling in right now for a variety of our records requests. Fortunately, we have data that has come in from both Boulder and Denver, which offers a nice comparison, as you can imagine, being 2 of the major metropolitan areas and being so close to one another. So for Boulder, specifically under the section that was mentioned earlier by Dave, 5-6-10, which is the camping ban. Over the past 5 years, 2010 through 2014, there were 1,767 citations under that ordinance alone, and 1,532 of those were for people who self-identify as homeless. To provide a little bit more of a isolated perspective, just this past year, in the year 2014, there were 281 total citations under the camping ban. 261 of those were from people who self-identify as homeless. Now, obviously, that means that a huge portion of the people who are receiving citations are homeless. But to dive a little bit deeper into that, or I'm sorry, to take a step back, to draw a comparison to Denver in 2014, 14 people who self-identify as homeless were issued the same camping ban citation. So stark comparison, 14 to 261. To take a step back and to talk a little bit about some of the significance under the eyes of the law and a little bit about the civil rights perspective on this. Dave was mentioning before the criminal context and criminal defense. So there's a long history of laws in the United States that ban behaviors that are inextricably linked to statuses. And the camping ban, we believe, is a new chapter in that legacy. And we at the University of Denver are not the only ones that believe this. As was mentioned earlier, the Department of Justice and HUD have issued statements saying that this is actually a constitutional violation of individuals' Eighth Amendment rights, that this is a cruel and unusual punishment. This past summer in Boise, Idaho, Boise had a similar camping ban. The Department of Justice issued a statement of interest saying that because the population in Boise that identified as homeless was larger than the number of beds provided by the city, that fining, citing, or arresting individuals for camping, which is seems like a very conduct descriptive word, but is obviously intimately and inextricably tied to a status of being homeless, that citation, that form of punishment was cruel and unusual, since these individuals had no other options at that time. Keeping that framework, that legal framework in mind with the numbers that I was citing earlier, there's a very similar issue here in Colorado and specifically in Boulder. And on that note, I don't know that I have more to add. Thank you.
Well, we certainly look forward to hearing more from you and the other panelists during our audience Q&A time. So I want to conclude the conversation here from our panelists with Sam Weaver, representing Boulder City Council, and we'll speak to fresh off of a study session just a couple nights ago that one of the major topics was what the city is doing and what the human service plan is around homelessness. So welcome, Sam. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you can enlighten us after you kind of give a further introduction of up beyond City Council and the interest you may have in this topic. What should we know about the city's perspective and what's happening in regards to this issue?
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you convening this conversation, and it's always good to hear what the advocates who think about it deeply have to say. I'll start off by saying that when I ran for city council, this issue was not really much on my radar. We came at this from a renewable energy perspective. I was focused on that side of things, but it became clear to me very quickly in my running for office that this was an extremely important issue. And it has both social justice components, but it's also got the perception of homelessness by the larger community. And so I began to get pretty interested in this issue in particular because I needed to develop a position on it. And I, was starting with a clean sheet of paper for that. Shortly after I got elected, I went down with some other advocates, Darren O'Connor and some others, Rob Smoke, to Denver to a Homeless Out Loud event. And one of the things about that event that was eye-opening to me was one of the people there gave a quick history of housing assistance in this country and what happened after the Reagan Revolution in 1980 and the extreme reduction in housing assistance dollars that are available to people. In addition to that, of course, there's the context of rising income inequality in this country, and you've got that going on kind of everywhere. And then in Boulder, we have specific challenges that are even more severe than in many communities because we're a regional job center, much like Denver is, and so we have rapidly escalating housing prices. So all of these things kind of come together as a nexus. And so I'm going to start my comments looking at the whole human services affordable housing perspective and then narrow it down a little bit to homelessness. So in Boulder, we have a human services budget and a human services plan. And part of the goal with the human services approach and our cooperation with the county, a brief note here, Denver is both a city and a county, so it has kind of total control over its social services. We're a city within Boulder County, and Boulder County gets most of the federal dollars that go to human services. So the city of Boulder augments that with about $7 million a year out of our budget. And our general fund budget is on the order of $130 million. And so about 7% goes to human services to allow us to do things in cooperation with the county that go above and beyond. And so when we think about homelessness, the first thing that you want to do, if possible, is prevent people from becoming homeless. And so our affordable housing program, so every housing project in Boulder that's built of any kind has to contribute 20% of its units to a permanent affordable status, whether rental or deed restricted. So that's one thing that Boulder does that's not even accounted in that 7 million to try and focus in on the lower end of the income spectrum. We do things with that money like we have childcare subsidies that close gaps between what the county can give for needy families and what childcare actually costs in the city of Boulder. We have a family resource center that helps direct people to services that are available. We have youth jail diversion programs called Impact. And so all of these are kind of contextual in trying to keep people out of situations that will drive them to homelessness. Youth who get in jail trouble early are likely to either become homeless or end up in jail. And so we try and look to what we can do with that. And then I'll just set that aside for the moment. We reviewed on Tuesday, both at a study session, both our human services strategy going forward, how we're going to develop that, what our take on that is. And homelessness is one of the 7 kind of key focus areas of our human services strategy. And then there is we reviewed the homeless plans in Boulder. And so I think one of the things that government does well is programs. You pointed out that people have looked to government historically to do these kinds of things. And so a lot of our activity is what kind of response can we do in coordination with our nonprofit sector and our faith sector. So I want to give a shout out to all of the people in the faith community. Tonight is an example of us being hosted by the faith community, and we have a 3-legged support system for emergency response to homelessness. It's the shelter, the Bridge House, and Boho, which is the overflow. Boho is almost entirely faith-based, and so again, the city really appreciates the efforts of our partners because we couldn't do it ourselves. Our budget isn't big enough to do all on our own. I want to talk some more about what the city does specifically in homelessness. In the last 2 years, we have made an effort, the city, to convene a conversation with those 3 service providers, because historically those service providers haven't worked together as effectively or efficiently as we thought they could. So things like common intake, reduce duplication of services, coordinate better, and have a ladder that takes people from emergency services into services that can move them towards housing, and then finally maybe into the low-income housing program that we have. So I want to point out a few things. We just opened 31 units of permanently supported housing in Boulder. We opened that last year, and that's for people who are willing to be case managed and who qualify as perhaps having some kinds of mental challenges that are going to keep them from being in a normal housed setting. And so permanently supportive housing provides a caseworker for them, provides them with the housing that they need. We have about 50 of those units in Boulder, 31 are at that location. Then I think this is a really cool new project that's just coming online. It's called the High Utilizer Project. And what that's done is worked with the police department as well as the homeless services provider to identify 55 members of the community that have frequent contact with the police and who are also unhoused. And so the goal there has been to get as many of those as are willing onto a waiting list for permanent housing. So 32 of those 55 have been put on that waiting list, and then 9 of them have been housed so far. So some in the permanently supportive housing and a few in other opportunities. The Bridge House is an organization in Boulder that does the Ready to Work program. So what they do is they work with members of the unhoused community to give them life skills. So Bridge House runs a day shelter. That's where they can make the first contact with the members of the unhoused community. And see, they also have convened, the Bridge House, days in which the faith community hosts multiple service providers in one location. So rather than having to go from office to office to office to look for county and city services, people can meet in one place to do that. And further coordination has led the shelter, which, as has been noted, normally closes between May and October. The shelter is going to do 2 things that are new this year. It's going to run day shelter during the sheltering season. So there will be 3 days during the week when people can be in the shelter during the day. And at those times, there will also be the service providers there. So we're moving it out of the faith-based community at that time and into the shelter. The shelter is also adding 20 beds during the summer. And those 20 beds are intended to be the first step on the ladder towards getting out of homelessness for people who are willing to have an interview with case manager, be clean and sober, and then work to get into some of the other programs that the Shelter for the Homeless is running. So that's just context for what the city does well. Ultimately, government is about balancing interests, right? And so there's interests of the homeless advocates, and there's a social justice concern, which I share and appreciate very much you guys holding our feet to the fire about what we're doing. But there's also, a scarcity of resources. There's not an infinite amount of money that we can put towards each of the issues that challenge us. So I just wanted to provide some background for you on how Boulder has viewed this so far. I look forward to hearing more about criminalization issues. I mean, I'm very surprised and would love to hear some feedback that Denver only has 14 camping citations in 2014. That was pretty eye-opening, and I'd like to have a chance to talk more with you afterwards about what you've learned in addition about Denver versus Boulder. I think I'll conclude my remarks there. I appreciate you all coming out and hearing about what's going on, and look forward to your feedback.
And you are listening to KGNU Boulder, Denver, and the Collaborative Community Radio Show, speaking this morning on the topic of housing availability and the criminalization of homelessness. And we've just had an opportunity to hear from David Harrison, Leanne Wheeler, and Nantia Bruin, and Ellie Zweibel, and Sam Weaver. And so now we would like to open up the conversation to the audience who's here at the live forum. Most of you are hearing this on the radio, but we do have a live forum event going on here in Boulder. And so we'd like to ask you to come to the microphone and speak clearly and directly and succinctly and address your question. And while you're queuing up to do that, I'm going to have our panelists go back again in the same order and just let our audience know if there's contact information, if you have a website, if you have contact information, if there's resources that can be accessed, if you could direct our listeners to how the best way to find that information, and just reintroduce yourself real quickly first for those who may have joined the program in progress.
Okay, well, I'm David Harrison, a criminal defense attorney here in Boulder in private practice. We do have a website, millerandharrison.com, but most of my practice is a private practice. I'm happy to help our unhoused neighbors when they need it, again, along with the CU Legal Aid and Defender program. I certainly have a significant number of people that stop by my office, and I've learned a lot about the resources, and we're able to direct them places. So,
I'm Leanne Wheeler. You may reach out to mdhi.org for information regarding the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, and I will be available after our gathering to present a card if you'd like to be in contact with me directly. I do have an advocacy business. I also have an engineering and technical services business. I keep a foot in aerospace, but I spend a great deal of time working in the veteran space, homeless veteran space, homeless space in general, with government, private sector, and faith. So I'm happy to connect after our meeting today and provide you with any information you may need to reach me later. Thank you.
I'm Nantia Ruan at the University of Denver Stirrup College of Law. You can reach me with any questions about our project at Nancy, R as in Roger, U-A, N as in Nancy, at law.du, denveruniversity.edu. And you can probably contact Ellie at my email address as well.
Yes, my name is Ellie Zweibel. I'm one of Professor Ruan's students, and that is correct.
So Sam Weaver with the Boulder City Council. The website for the City of Boulder is www.bouldercolorado.gov. And if you go to the City Council homepage, you will find links to archives of study sessions where you'd be able to look up kind of all the background research that went into the 2 study sessions that we just had. And it includes things like a full list of services that are offered in the city for homeless advocacy and service. So you can also get a hold of me, weaverS@bouldercolorado.gov.
All right, so let's move to some audience questions and answers. So if you would mind just coming up to the microphone, and please be bold in doing so. I'll be ready to jump in as a facilitator with my own question if there's no one at the microphone, but my preference is for lots of great audience participation. So please introduce yourself first and tell us who you are and address your question to any or all of the panelists.
Okay, my name is Bill Cohen, and I've had many hats in this community, but right now I am the president of a new nonprofit law firm that is about to launch in Boulder called JSUP, the Boulder law firm for the unhoused. And we intend to represent homeless people in a variety of contexts. One of the things we want to address is this policy of criminalization versus social services. And I want to commend Sam and council for the tone of the study session and the staff for the program that they put together in cooperation with the social services people. It represented to me a sea change in thought and approach and philosophy of dealing with homelessness. We still have the problem that David spoke about and the statistics that the young man next to you brought out of kind of giving with the right hand and taking away with the left. It seems to me that it's self-defeating to offer these folks services and prosecute them for basically trying to exist. And what I'm asking of you, Sam, is I heard several council members, both officially during the hearing, the study session, and unofficially afterwards, indicate that they were interested in reviewing at least the camping ordinances and perhaps some of the other ordinances that criminalize homelessness. And I'm wondering how you feel about that and how that would come about, how we could have that kind of a study as to whether we should continue to arrest and give tickets to homeless people that we're trying to get out of homelessness.
So the issue of how it would happen is a good one. You know, what would be the process? Now is a great time to be thinking about it because we'll soon have a new council. So council elections are November 3rd. And when a new council is seated, one of the first things that happens, I think it'll probably happen in January, is we have a retreat. And during the retreat, we discuss what our priorities will be for 2 years. And so at the last retreat, homelessness was on the priority list. You know, we wanted to work on it. And so there has been a work program within the Human Services Department to continue advancing. And I told you some of the results that have come out over the last couple of years. So how? I would say reach out to all council members in advance of the retreat and let them know your feelings about it, because that's where, and I would say if we adopt it as part of a work program, one important pathway is, of course, through the Human Relations Commission, because the Human Relations Commission can hash through a lot of these issues, request the data that we would need to make the decision, and go about gathering that. We have a member of the Human Relations Commission here, 2 members here tonight, apologies. And these are people that I think the earlier you can get them educated about your concerns and your issues, that's the best way to really work that through to the council. That's why we have boards and commissions, because they are experts and can focus in particular areas and then bring recommendations forward to us. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and just a point for our listening audience, you're hearing this post-election, but it's the forum that you're hearing was pre-recorded, took place just a few days before the election. So you have some insight that we don't have here now. But speaking of insight, I'm wondering if there's anybody else on the panel who would want to respond to Mr. Cohen's question.
Well, I guess the thing that this is David Harrison, and I just want to point out that I and anybody that's paying attention appreciates what the city does. as far as the money they spend and the energy put into affordable housing and those kind of things. We can argue about some of the, details of it and whether we like that, but overall, I think anybody paying attention has to recognize that. But I would just say that what I often see is a discussion of homelessness becomes a discussion of affordable housing and providing housing, which of course is the answer to homelessness. I mean, it gets rid of the homeless part of homelessness. But regardless of how much affordable housing there is or free housing or anything, there will always be people without a place to spend the night. I mean, that's just a sheer issue of numbers. I think the point in time survey has shown that in Boulder there's 900 homeless people on any given night, or I saw 600 on one, which is pretty consistent with nationwide homelessness being about, if I've read this correctly, 1% of a population. So that's about right. So you got 160 beds at the homeless shelter when it's open, including the transition beds. You've got, from the last time I looked, boho in a synagogue or a church will have maybe 200 people. You got to figure maybe, I mean, let's be generous, 200-300 of those people find a friend's couch or a car to sneak into for the night. You still end up with several hundred people that are going to be outside, and criminalizing their sleeping outside is something that we'd really like to change. Does that mean that there's some alternative? I think I heard one of the council members say that there are 91 parks in Boulder. Was that Boulder or Denver? I'm losing track. But why can't we pick one of those that allows camping? I understand there's infrastructure issues and liability issues and all of that, but if Boulder is nothing else, it's a community of very educated, pretty intelligent people. And I find it challenging when Boulder officials start saying, let's look at what's being done other places and see if we can incorporate it here. Boulder's always had a history of let's be innovative. Let's get together a group of these smart people in this town that we have and talk about this and come up with a solution, maybe a solution that's not the same as Colorado Springs or something like that. So that's what I would encourage us to keep in mind. And the bottom line, if we're asking to end the camping ban, we're asking the city to stop doing something and stop spending money on that. And it just seems like the way to go. Anyway.
Okay, Leanne, did you want to say something to that?
I do, if I
Okay.
may.
And then we'll
Leanne-
take another question after that.
Perfect, Leanne Wheeler. And so I have a couple of thoughts. As it relates to the point in time survey, so I'm going to go back to the 3,000 plus churches in the metro and an allowable that happens in Denver County. Any church by ordinance can house up to 9 individuals per night. No questions asked. You don't have to call your insurance company. You don't have to turn it into a big deal. It's a thing. You can house 9 individuals in the church, should you choose, overnight. And so with 3,000 plus churches and the ability to do that times 9 on any given night, point in time says the number is X. And so by not using that faith resource, you're cutting out the 2,700 opportunities to without anybody caring. My math is bad, but without anyone caring about whether or not that person is placed in faith. So as a woman of faith, the obligation lies with faith in partnership with business and a benevolent government. So when we talk about the government's budget, a very limited budget, but generous for I guess for context, 7% of your budget looking at this. Many would argue it should be half, many should argue it would be more than that, but it's 7%, that's what it is. That is the limit. And so if you can get to a point where you're able to redirect those funds by avoiding costs in an area that is less humane than helping churches figure out how to house folks overnight should they need to, then that's I think a better return on the investment of those tax dollars that are being paid out here in Boulder. Secondary to that, I think there's an opportunity to utilize private sector and their discretionary income as part of the solution. So when we're having a conversation about innovative dialogue, these are private business, the business sector is nothing if not innovative. They figured out how to enjoy double-digit profit margins, top and bottom line growth, and those kinds of things in an economy where people are just now starting to spend again. So they know how to think innovatively. What I'd like to see happen in community is some dollars being allocated, and I do believe in a government budget to start, city council seems most appropriate to sit down and convene those three entities, have an honest dialogue about what's needed and what it costs, and then you can have a conversation about where you get the money from. I think what we end up doing instead is saying I only have X to spend, and with that I can only do thus and so. We understand wholly what's required to support basic human needs. What we don't have is the cost by which to do that, an actual literal cost on how to conduct our lives for every citizen and meet their basic human needs. There's a cost to that. Once we understand that, then we go out and say, this is how we pay for it. And so I'd like to see that conversation get started. I think that actually, flipping that dialogue is the opportunity to be innovative here in Boulder. How do we create that dialogue? I don't know that it's been done because we tend to rely on the other model. How much have we set aside to do this work? We can only do so much, and then we all throw our hands up and are disappointed by the outcomes. Business is benevolent. Business has to be approached to be benevolent. What ends up happening is that a business owner is not excited about seeing a tent across the street. They don't want their customers to come and show up and see that tent across the street. And so that is what they articulate to the governance. I don't want that. But no one has said to that business, how can you help us figure out how not to have that occur? We understand that you might have some discretionary income. We are convening. Would you be willing to send someone from your HR department, that's typically where that function lies, community outreach within an HR department? Can you send someone over to have that dialogue? And so I think that's an ideal opportunity to be innovative, is to flip the script on that, what's limited. Everyone's fighting over the same 4 nickels. And we can look at the stock market and know that there's more than 4 nickels out there. It's just that we've all dialed in on those 4. And so I would encourage, and I'm happy to participate in that conversation. I'm willing to drive up from Aurora for that. So I do believe that is, in fact, how you move the needle, transform the conversation, and move the public will.
And you are listening to KGNU Boulder, Denver. We're having a conversation this morning on housing availability and the criminalization of homelessness, and we're at the audience Q&A time. And so, Rob, please step very close to the microphone, introduce yourself, and direct your question.
Yeah, my name is Rob Smoke, and I've lived in Boulder for, or very close by, for 29 years. I've been homeless off and on the past several years. I've paid attention to this conversation about homelessness for a long time. I was on the Human Relations Commission for the City of Boulder for 5 years, from 2003 to 2008. And the one thing that just constantly comes up for me, and you don't hear it talked about that much when people who are not homeless are talking about homelessness, is the fact that laws targeting the homeless, like the urban camping ban, which the Department of Justice once again finds to be unconstitutional, but exists in Boulder, and it's being prosecuted vigorously in Boulder. the one thing that's not discussed is that these type of laws legitimize prejudice. If somebody out there, somewhere, anywhere on the streets has some tendency to violence, and there's plenty of those people around, we know that real well, and plenty who are not homeless, believes that, well, you know, the city council of Boulder and the police department, they don't care about what happens to the homeless. And it's the same thing in Denver and so on. Well, that is essentially, in a very fundamental way, giving that person an opportunity in their mind to practice violence, to practice their prejudice. And I've spoken with women who have lived on the streets of Denver and Boulder, and that threat of violence is escalated by a law like this. And so how can you say that that's legitimate? How can anybody say that that is fundamentally helping our community? What it is, it's teaching people values that, you know, they're really anathema to just living in a free, you know, and friendly social environment, which is what we should have with less effort. And I just have to address it as a question, perhaps, to Sam. The the HRC meeting that I was at, I believe in May or June, had a presentation similar to the presentation that was made by Karen Ron, Director of Housing and Human Services for Boulder, City of Boulder, just the other night, Tuesday night. And the information that I received was, according to the survey statistics that she was using, over 600 people on any given night are going to be found to be homeless in Boulder. So the one question I didn't hear asked at the study session on Tuesday was, how does what we're doing match up against the need? I mean, the city was fine with bragging about a creation of 30 homeless beds on Lee Hill Drive. Well, if there's 600 people who are saying, just on the face of it, according to the city's own statistics, that they're homeless, how does, you know, this drop in the bucket kind of stuff, how does the city, you know, go about bragging that this is something substantial? I mean, the facts are that in Denver and in Boulder, there have been 10-year plans for several decades, and the numbers of homeless keep increasing. And so, I don't know, I made a lot of comment here, but I'm hearing things, particularly from the city, that are just a big disappointment.
Okay, anybody like to respond to that?
Well, I mean, again, we have a lot of needs that we need to address in the city. It is unfortunate that homelessness is only one of those many, keeping the water running, keeping the flood sewers in good shape, providing the other human services that I mentioned to you. So this is all a challenge for us of balancing almost infinite needs with finite resources. And so, Rob, I'm sorry that you don't like me bragging about what we're doing, but it is at least positive steps forward. And if you look, I'm going to come back to the regional discussion here, because this, if you look around Boulder County at the other cities in Boulder County, we end up with a lot of issues that they should be helping with as well and are not. And so we end up, I think one of the reasons our point in time surveys are what they are is because we become a little bit of an attraction because we have good services. The other piece that the city has is a lot of permanently affordable housing. So there are HUD versions of that. There's ownership versions of that. You know, our goal, we're at about 8% permanently affordable housing in the city right now, which is a pretty high number for a government-sponsored program, and we're on our way to 10. So I agree that it's not as much as I would like to see us be able to do, but if you look at what's going on in the city, we have a whole array of priorities that we have to focus on, and this is one of them. The reason I mentioned the Human Relations Commission that you know better than anybody is because they at least have the bandwidth to focus on this one much more intently than we will in a full work program.
And yeah, while I'm waiting for another response to this, I'll just add in, I think that is really the heart of why we are having this conversation, is that when there is, substantial efforts being made with limited resources, that's not solving all the problem. I think the question that remains on the table is, in the interim, until we get some of the creative solutions that you've mentioned, Leanne, or maybe a different way of skinning the cat, what is the rationale behind maintaining these punitive, and I think that's why we have these kinds of laws. So if any of you would like to speak to that.
I just wanted to respond to the issue of whether people come to Boulder for the services. And I think there's just no evidence to support that that happens. The point in time survey, again, 600 people nationally, it's generally 1% of the population that's in line. I think, I forget who it was, Karen Ron, who said at the study session, there's no evidence to support that people come here. I don't know how much research has been put into the other cities in the county and what they do and how they handle their homeless people. But all of that aside, my clients who get charged with under the camping ordinance complain to me because some of them would like to leave, but they have to stay because they need to come to court. And it gets continued, and some of them have complained about, well, I've got something waiting for me in California. I need to go. Do I go and fail to appear? Or, so the camping ban isn't helping people move along.
Leanne Wheeler, Ken, I'd like to respond to your question. There is no human value in having punitive circumstances for being unhoused. It doesn't have value for the humanity of the individual who's affected. That said, I also understand how this thing came to be. I think there's a way to have a conversation as we talk about diversionary work, and we're hiring officers as resource officers, and we're doing, listen, let's identify what those true resources are. I'm not familiar with the ordinance with respect to the faith community here in Boulder, city or the county of Boulder. Let's figure that out. And so if a resource officer does in fact encounter, then why don't we have a dialogue with the bohos and this church in fact, and see if we can't figure something out. And to pull the thread too on housing, and this is a conversation that I've had more than once with Aaron and others, is the faith community has already fought the good fight to get their church instilled in the neighborhood. It was also affected by a not in my neighborhood philosophy in most cases. Most neighborhoods don't want churches in their communities. Call it easement, call it parking, call it we don't know who they're going to be inviting to services, and whatever little human ills that we have in our humanity. So the fight's been fought, the building is here. And so if we can understand what the ordinances are with respect to how now faith can serve, and then engage those churches and make a specific ask, I think we can take a look at the gap that says we've got 5% of the need squared away with these 30 homes or opportunities, beds. What do we do now with the other 550? And so to me, that's math. So my math was bad earlier. 27,000 opportunities in Denver County to house 5,000 on a given night, point in time, if it's accurate, plus or minus 6%. I think we said the margin of error is there. So what is that number for Boulder County, and then how do we engage? In the meantime, you have to stop criminalizing the fact that we don't have a solution for the 550. You absolutely have to stop doing that. Now, we haven't, and this is the collective we, I suspect, haven't appealed to those folks, those bigger voices, those fiscal voices that are insisting on some of these punitive actions. So there's something about our humanity that says, I don't want to be so close. I don't want homelessness so close to me. I don't want it. And so we show up in business suits, we show up in different ways, and those voices show up at council meetings, and they are in fact the loudest. And so forgive my putting it this way, but if you're not dealing with citizen statesmen and stateswomen, and that's individuals who understand that their service to their community is one of pure service to their community, not career politicians, not folks who are looking for opportunity. So, under the assumption that we have a governance body that is a true citizen statesman or stateswoman, then there ought to be an ability to appeal to other individuals in their humanity as to how not to be punitive when we don't have a solution for the other 550. How do we survive that? How do we move toward holding those 550 up until we can find a solution to the problem? It exists. Writing tickets, moving folks along, making the argument to get on a bus, and so Denver will tell you that they're all coming to Denver. They will. That's. So every community is going to say they're coming here. We can't. Listen, you can't serve the folks that you have, and if no one gets on the bus and goes anywhere, you still can't support those who live here. And so let's figure out how to solve the here, and not worry about what happens there, in as much as, of course, you want to be doing what works for your community. You absolutely cannot penalize folks who have nothing, are looking for something, and there's nothing to be had. How is it their indictment that there's nothing to be had? It's amoral, it's inhumane, it's on the wrong side of righteousness. And as a woman of faith, we will all give an accounting for how we saw to the least of these.
Very briefly, Nantia Ruan from the University of Denver. To the point about the ineffectiveness of these ordinances, if you think about what happens when you get a citation and you don't show up, and then you're put into the system, you've been arrested, you serve jail time, and this is on your record. The perpetuation of the cycle of poverty, because what you're doing is then now you have a record, right? And it's very difficult then to put on application for a house in terms of renting, very difficult for application for work to actually get a job when you have this follow you. And so these ordinances, the criminalization of the status of homelessness, perpetuates the cycle of poverty. And really briefly, it's not just an anti-camping ban, by the way. It's not that urban camping ban. It's also this aggressive panhandling. We already have assault citation. We'll also have assault ordinances on the books. We don't need panhandling or aggressive panhandling as well, because that is redundant, first of all. It targets homelessness in a way that makes absolutely no sense. And so we'd like to broaden that conversation as well.
Okay, let's take another question. Again, please introduce yourself, and thanks for your patience. We just got a lot of great questions and comments here.
Very good comments. My name is Laurel Herndon. I'm a longtime resident of Boulder County. And Ms. Wheeler, I appreciate your perspective that there are three legs to the stool, perhaps business, church, faith community, and government. But I don't look at it as people keep looking only to government. The way I see it is we as a society redress our grievances to government. Government is about justice. The other, faith community, that's about charity. Charity is wonderful. Charity is needed, but justice is what's really called for, to my mind, in this situation. I was really taken aback when I saw the video that was presented to City Council of the reaction to someone smoking within the homeless population, and then the smoking on the mall. It had never occurred to me that dichotomy, and I think we really need to take that into account. And we do need creative solutions, and frankly, Tabor is an enormous problem for us. There is a source of funding that most states use in order to expand their low-income housing, and that is a transfer tax on real estate. We are banned from doing that because Boulder did not get grandfathered in the same way Vail and Aspen and some of the other locations did. And so when Tabor came along, we had a constitutional ban on having that funding source. I'd like to know, perhaps, Mr. Weaver, are there discussions going on City Council or the HRC? I know Ms. Young is here also, to truly investigate this long-term problem, being the ban on the transfer tax on real estate. We not only could build a fund for paying for low-income housing, at the same time we also reduce the speculation, which causes even more havoc with the housing supply that we have here. So lobbying is one of the great things that government can do, and I'd like to know what kind of ongoing efforts are there to prepare for lobbying at the right time to get a request for a constitutional change so that Boulder could vote on its own whether or not to institute a real estate transfer tax, which could be very targeted so that people that own their own homes, own the homes that they live in, would not perhaps be subject to it. It would only be speculators, people owning more than one home. I think we could build an enormous fund for paying for housing for the additional 550 people. And personally, that would feel better to me than trying to only rely on the faith community. I think we need to do this through a justice model.
Thank you.
So I do want to point out that my colleague Mary Young is in the audience as well, who serves on City Council. So thanks for being here, Mary. In answer to your question, getting things done at the state level is very difficult. The state, and I'm just telling you this, and it doesn't affect the validity of your point, but the state takes interest in anything that has statewide interest that they believe. And so, for instance, we can't do a minimum wage in the city of Boulder because the state forbids us from doing that. We cannot do rent control in the city of Boulder because the state forbids us from doing that. So we have a lot of items of municipal independence that we would like to see done. I would love to be able to do, or at least talk about, the kinds of real estate transfer tax that you're talking about for many of the reasons that you listed. I don't believe it's in our legislative agenda, but I'll go look. That's the first thing that we will deal with on November 17th with the new council. The new council gets seated, we get the new legislative agenda to look over. And so I will look for that. I'll look and see, but I know that broadly speaking, we fight very hard for municipal rights in the state, and it is a power struggle that goes on over and over and over again. And unfortunately, we often come out on the losing end of that power struggle because the legislators can more or less just decide that they want more power than the cities, and then something goes through, and that's the end of that. Tabor, you know, it's kind of the worst thing that happened in Colorado history, as far as I'm concerned, in the last 50 years. It was a terrible, terrible decision, and it was not sold legitimately for what it was. I agree with you all about this being a social issue. I want to return to something, though, that you said, David. I don't believe that people come to Boulder just because of the services, and I agree that, yeah, they can get stuck here if they get a ticket. The point I was really trying to make is we have to keep the regional dialogue going. So I'm glad we've got somebody here from Denver, but cities like Louisville and Lafayette and Superior and Erie, you know, they say we don't have any homeless. Well, I don't think that's true. You know, I think if they're probably invisible to them, they're probably living in cars, you know, but there probably are 1% of those communities that are homeless. So all I was advocating for was, you know, it is not just Boulder and Denver in the state. The other cities in the state need to take responsibilities. And we, you know, for the first time, I think there's a study going on that's looking at all the communities in Boulder County. I think this just happened very recently. So on the justice issue, the one thing that plays against all of the arguments, not a direct rebuttal, it just is hard, is a lot of this happens in public spaces for which the government is responsible. And so when public urination happens, when fights happen, any of the bad behaviors, which in many cases are already illegal, we end up hearing about it a lot from the community. We hear not just from the business community, there are many, many people who write to us. So when we look at the filter of the incoming communication that we get, there's a lot of countervailing pressure that says you need to look at the impacts this is having on my neighborhood, or this is having on my business, or this is having on whatever. And so as a body that has to balance the interests, we have to take those as legitimate concerns and figure out how to balance the interests. And I won't say that we're at a final place right now. I mean, I really believe that there will be ongoing discussions of this, and when the new council is seated, just like with the last council, I think that this will be one of the issues that we try and make further improvements in. And it concerns me. You know, it's why I have gone to the effort to be here tonight, to listen to the arguments at some further length, because we get Rob and Darren coming where they get 2 or 3 minutes at the council meetings, but that's not enough time to really have a dialogue about it.
And so I appreciate your response, and then I'll pass it on. There is justice in our governance, and there is justice in our humanity. And so the two absolutely can complement one another. When I think about the civil rights movement, when I think about women's suffrage, when I think about gay rights, when I think about some of the downright, outright, ugly ways that our justice and governance didn't work well, our justice and faith did, and our humanity did, and they were able to sway what happens in governance and the justice of governance. The role of government is a critical one. So in fact, we pay taxes, and our expectation is that they are going to support and enable our ability to live happy lives. They are going to support and enable us to run businesses, to travel to and fro, to do humane things, carry the casserole, set up opportunities for folks to eat. So the two are a complement. I don't know of a time, and I'm saying this because the world occurs differently for me than it may for anyone else in the room. I don't know of a time where faith and justice and our humanity did not influence our justice and our governance. And so I think it is a complementary relationship, but I appreciate the point. I rely, as a small business owner, I rely on the support and enable function of government. I think that is the role, and they do that with a heart of benevolence, I'd like to think, with an eye on understanding that the public is entitled to certain inalienable rights, as it were, because we pay taxes, and their entire salary is based on the taxes that we pay. And so the challenge for me in this balancing act and understanding with compassion the tight spot that our governing body is in with respect to their own balancing act is to say, listen, as a taxpayer, as a citizen, I am expecting you to support and enable the function of all things socially just. And so although there is a call, in particular when there are things occurring in public spaces that are unsafe for those who are doing them, in addition to those who may encounter them, there is, I'm not sure the right answer is the punitive answer. So I am not without empathy and understanding that it's a challenging and delicate balance to make, but it's dual, and it's and speaking in terms of pure cash and opportunity and agility and the ability to spend money any way you want, faith in business has that, and is more nimble and able to do that than government, because they in fact have to answer to we the people. So I think that's the 2 points that I'd like to stress. It's not that faith isn't just. We are in fact called to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with a God we acknowledge. And so all the great things that have occurred in this great country that I've served came initially through the faith justice leg first.
Just real quickly, and then get to questions. I guess one thing that maybe we can both do as to the other cities in the county is we could look and see if they have camping bans. I don't think the county does. Boulder police officers have told my clients when they've said, what are we supposed to do? The shelter was full and we didn't win the lottery and we didn't get in. The officer said, go over there, you'll be in the county. So I think some of these other cities don't have, I'm going to guess, Lafayette and Louisville probably don't have camping bans. Not sure how that factors into the conversation, but it may.
Okay, let's take another question here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Zuckerman. I chair the City of Boulder Human Relations Commission. And thank you so much for the panel. Each one of you, your voice is so important. And thank you in particular, Ms. Wheeler, for talking about humanity. For me, this issue has caused a lot of soul searching. I just wanted to make a couple comments based on when I looked into my soul, what came up. And I also want to thank my friend, Darren O'Connor, for helping me in my understanding of this issue. I would like to say that public land belongs to all of us. And I also would like to say that we shouldn't make decisions about public land based on whether or not it's difficult for law enforcement. That shows that our priorities are out of order. And I'd also like to talk about the closing of parks in reaction to the Occupy movement, which was problematic and it is problematic. And at this point, it's obsolete. So I'm in favor of opening public parks in the city of Boulder between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. And I also want to encourage everyone here to attend all of the Human Relations Commission's meetings, which happen on the third Monday of every month in City Council chambers. And my pledge to everyone here is that I'm going to be putting this issue on our agenda for November. And Councilmember Weaver, thank you for mentioning what's happening in the next coming months. Undoubtedly, the HRC will be coming to City Council and bringing up this issue and how we can work together to end this camping ban in our public spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a note to that, and also a reminder to our listening audience, you're listening to KGNU Boulder, Denver, and we're discussing a topic that you're hearing this morning on housing availability and the criminalization of homelessness. And so I want to thank our panelists, and I also would be remiss, we've talked a lot about the faith community here, that we are convening here at Hope Church Boulder, Hope Boulder. Thank you so much for hosting us here this evening. Let's show our appreciation to Hope for being here. And let me just take a couple more questions.
Hello, my name is Paola Bottone, and I happen to be living outside for 5 years. There's only one reality: I do not call myself homeless. And as a matter of fact, I would have a question for all of you, because I've been actually looking for the answer for a while. Nobody seems to be able to tell me. When is it that in our history we somehow felt justified to give titles to human beings according to their possessions or not, or define their own identity, their own beingness in functions of things? Now, the question I have for all of you is, do you have an answer for that? Do you know when the word homeless was actually used for the first time? Because if I was to say to you, to all of you, that the issue of homelessness might happen to start by that word, by the use of that word, plain and simple. See, home is a state of the mind, of the heart. We're home in our heart. That's where home is, always been. So in other words, to actually define home as a material thing that people are supposed to be having, as an exterior thing that they are supposed to be finding somewhere else but inside of themselves, as a woman of faith, you will know that home is in the heart, because that is the heart and the home that we were given by just being born on this planet. Yes. See, if I stand there in front of you, it's because I'm a 3-time cancer patient. 5 years ago, didn't have family or friends or support to be there and rescue me. Yeah. I was given the sentence, cancer. What do you do with that? What do you do when somebody comes to you and tells you you have cancer and you have no support? No. Well, it becomes the journey of a lifetime, see? the journey of the journeyman, which is that at some point you look at inside your heart, then you look at inside your own experience, yes, and then you wonder what are those laws written for and for who? Because no matter of life and death, I will argue that all your nice laws, especially the ones written a few thousand years ago, yeah, that's why I catch everyone. Because the problem of homelessness in this country, I don't know if you have all realized, but about 60% of all people on the street find themselves on the street because of health issues. Yes. Number two, because their families felt it was okay for them to look at addiction and call that a loser behavior. Oh, it's a choice. Yes. Meanwhile, yes. Meanwhile, it was easy for the family to actually kick their children out on the street, call them losers, oh, the shame of the family, so that they would not have to take care of them. Yeah. So homelessness. I am born on this planet. I am born in this country. It is my home. And I wonder why I should even have to ask permission to anyone about what I am to do with my days, my seconds. Because when you have death after your bum, so you do not have the luxury for that kind of stupid thinking. Because when I say it is absolutely the most pathetic, stupid, uninspiring, boring, and oh my God, so old. Because it would appear that we have 2,000 years of history written that only talk about that. May I just simply summarize in 1 second what we're talking about here? Because it would happen to be just one line of frequencies, a frequency of thinking that has been at work for thousands of years. Why? Because at some point somebody decided that it was okay for that person to judge others. Judge. So when I say camping ban, now can I just ask about this urination thing? Because I would like to also mention that by law, to have a law that tells me that I cannot urinate on public land, meanwhile I don't want to use on public land, can I have a bathroom? Well, by law, you're not allowed to actually use the bathroom. You are in public land from 11 to 7. So your laws are actually telling my bladder that she by law does not have the right to exist and perform her own natural function. That's another one, right? But camping, I tell people that between 11 o'clock at night and 7 o'clock in the morning, they have no right to be with mother. I will argue that if I was to heal, I only did it because I spent time with mother. She was the only one to feed me and above. The electromagnetic field of the planet is healing. May we speak about healing now? You have 60% of all the homeless on the streets, who are people who are not being given the help by their own family and their own close friends. And we expect the government to be taken care of. Of course, I agree. We should not be the problem of the government. The government should only step in when really the families cannot afford, like the French government does. May I just share the example with France? Up to the age of 34 years old, if you cannot support yourself because of any reason, depression, you're not feeling good, you're off your base. Up to the age of 34 years old, it is the responsibility of your family to take care of you. You will not be on the street. Of course, if your family cannot afford, that's when the government steps in. But we have the problem we have here, not because of governments, but because we are used to do things in a way that somehow now does not match our reality as energetic beings. See, we cannot expect to go home and feed our children with anything different than the memories we've created all day. But when we have a society where lying, cheating, stealing, going to places where we buy things $2 and coming home and selling 60, and we call that a good day at work, this is why I don't read the mention, everybody. Yes, genetic memories. And genetic memories will make it so that if a human being is not in complete harmony with what his heart tells him to do, that human being is born to start feeling bad, sad, depressed. He's not aligned with his own journey. So you want to know what the problem of homelessness can and how easily it can be reduced, it can be addressed. By the way, a little detail. It's very interesting to have very big structures with a very high number of beds that for some reason the fire department somehow decides that it cannot use because fire issues. So we have a structure that has cost how many millions of dollars with a bunch of beds that get never used every night. Because we have a fire department ordinance that says, oh, it's not safe. Now, do we not realize that we are to raise the discourse on level? See, the journeyman is also what you find on your plate. And yes, I'm looking at you. But if you do not realize that a lot of young people do not have a place in the society that you guys are playing with, they do not see themselves in it. They just don't see it. Do you expect them to find a job? They really try hard. You have to give a lot of them do. They can't get. The lying, the cheating, the manipulating, some of them, of those kids, really don't want it no more. They're ready for the new world, the world of the heart, compassion, help a brother, unconditional. And when I say I'm recovered, I did it with Mother Earth, my heart, God, and I'm not religious, but my third eye is open. See, I don't do religion. But it's time we raise the discourse to a much higher level. See, I'm born in this planet with the right to breathe, the right to be anywhere with Mother any given time. And for any government to dare, tell me that I cannot access Mother. Pardon me, but yeah. By the way, the last thing I would like to ask, just because so that you'll be ready, what you're seeing happening is a bunch of people who really cannot find their room inside society. So they are the soul journey man. Those people don't really want to go inside because they're following the journey of their soul. Their soul is telling them to go places. So those people are very happy to show up somewhere, have a park where they have a bathroom, maybe a kitchen that they can cook their own food, left alone. See, I would start trusting humanity. Because when we think that every time we have homeless outside on the street making a mess and all those things, I will argue that there's so much more mess happening inside the little boxes and much more violence by the Yes, and I will say that, I will stop that there, but you got the point, yes. To allow the journey of the man through city to city is not only the smartest thing to do, it allows the growth, it also imports an enormous amount of creativity. And those people are on a journey, they're there to love the place. We love Mother. Some of us really do. And we love it everywhere we are. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, but I would really encourage all of you to please consider my words. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. One of the reasons why I'm glad we record these sessions. So I will be re-listening to that.
Cheers. And by the way, I really appreciate everything you do. You have to know, okay?
Thank you.
I can tell when it's facing. Cheers.
Paola, here's the answer to the question as the world occurs for me. At some point, we've lost sight of we've lost sight of a source.
Thank you.
Call it whatever you want.
Oh.
I don't think there's any regimented God we serve. He's limitless. Call him what you want. Call her what you want. Call that source what you want. We've lost sight of that. And somewhere in our humanity, we have believed the lie that we don't have our power anymore. And we have relented to a ruling class. That ruling class has ascended to a position of privilege, and that class sets the pace for these laws, for what happens in those boxes, so it happened then. I don't know when, but it happened then. And so we often lose sight of that. I would love to visit with you after.
I would love that. Yes, because more people need to have the chance. So thank you.
Okay, Darren.
All right. I'm Darren O'Connor. I've really enjoyed hearing from all of you tonight. I really appreciate you all being here. This is a topic that I live and breathe. I'm a little emotional after hearing that beautiful person speak. But I want to still get to some things that really hurt. And I want to talk for a minute about criminalization, because that was part of the night's focus. And we talk about people going to jail. We talk about people not getting jobs because they went to jail and being on this endless cycle. But there's also the just absolutely demeaning and dehumanizing impact of getting targeted by whatever officer has been told by, and Sam, I'm going to look to you on this, is that I hear from City Council that we're not making a smoking ban to go after anybody in particular. And I just saw a quote recently, I can't do it complete justice, but it says, in its majestic equitability, the law equally applies to the rich and the poor, not to sweep under the bridge. or to camp on the public lands. And that is Boulder to a T. You guys on council and our city manager, I'm sure that to sleep at night, you must believe that these are equitable laws. But when I bring a video that shows the police beating someone for an unlit cigarette, now, you know, I wasn't there, but I've met the person who was. So when you see that, my question is, how can you then not know that that's what the police are hearing? And when I did video an officer saying, the city manager tells us to come here. Okay, so that's question one. How are we going to address the inequitable action, you know, fulfilling of going after these laws that is not, that, you know, on top of it, yeah, it's an equitable law, but it's not being fairly processed. And then, you know, I brought a wonderful gentleman here tonight. He was arrested for sleeping in Boulder. He has a back problem. He sometimes doesn't make it to the shelter because he has to walk 10 minutes and he's got to sit. He's got to walk 10 minutes and he's going to sit. And so he was arrested. He lost his pack. Police at some point threw it away. Maybe he didn't know there is a process to get your stuff back, but I hear plenty of people don't. So he lost his license. Now he can't get disability. Now he's on that treadmill. And what is he going to do tonight? Because he didn't make it to the shelter so that he could hear this, he's going to risk arrest again. And I know I got to give up my time here in a sec, but we spent $250,000. I want to reiterate and thank Boulder and Mary Young, City Councilman Sam. I understand we spend a lot of money, we do a lot of great things, but until, it's already been said, until we address that the need is not being met, we just have to look at people as people and not as homeless, as this beautiful person said. So $250,000 per Lee Hill 31 apartments. You know, we spent millions of dollars on that, and it's a great thing. I applaud it. Right now, Denver Homeless Out Loud just had 10 people arrested putting up buildings. 10 took arrest. The buildings cost under $1,000. All we need is land, toilets. They had all of that where they were. And the city of Denver brought in helicopters. They calculated enough to build 20 or 30 more of those homes. So I don't know how we have that conversation. I know you're interested in tiny homes. And city code, it's just a code. And there is land. I know Boulder Housing Authority has land they're trying to build on. That takes years, they tell us. In those years, tiny homes could be down, and I'm telling you, in a week. So please address the laws, you know, how you can look at how they're being enacted, and then look me in the eye and tell me they're being fairly enacted. And then how can we move forward? Because there's plenty of people ready. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we will need to take a look at these laws. There is no law that's perfectly equitably applied. And the quote that you quoted is one that I've had in my head for many years. I mean, it is the hardest thing about being a city council person is figuring out where the balance really is, where it fairly is applied. The video that you showed us the other night was quite disturbing. And, you know, I wouldn't expect that a cigarette issue would need to become a violent confrontation. There's always two sides to every story. And I would not sit in judgment on that either way because I wasn't there and I won't hear the case like a judge would. But it causes me great pause. You know, I've gone down to this event and the other event because I'm trying to make sense of what my responsibility is on the social justice side versus the other kinds of complaints that we get from the community around the behaviors that some unsheltered people sometimes exhibit. And so that's the hard part, is the rotten apple spoils the bunch, right?
We're talking about people who are emotionally
taking beds.
Excuse me.
They are sick, and we want to go there.
So some of the services that I was talking about are exactly for that. You know, it's how do you take the person who has the problem with their back and get that dealt with in a better way than on an emergency nightly basis. So it can't be just the one thing of these services. Our laws do have to be right. They're probably not right now. And it's a matter of getting this elevated in priority and putting the pressure on and growing a coalition. You know, the number of people in this room would be vastly outnumbered by the members of our community who will be very upset if we start talking about changing the camping ban. I'm just telling you, if you can broaden your coalition, it helps a lot. So I'm just
76% of this city is against camping ban. Denver Foundation drew that information. You funded the Denver Foundation to get that information.
Thank you for that.
And by the way, this hour they have to be in the shelter, so even if they want to be here, they could not. By law, by 5, they have to be in the shelter. Otherwise, they don't have a bed.
Okay, another comment on this.
Sorry.
Yeah, and just also too, it's not helpful to make conversations if you're not at the microphone for our listening audience, and this is certainly for those of us who are here tonight, but also for our listening audience who is listening on KGNU Boulder, Denver.
Something that struck me when Darren mentioned, and I intend to keep this brief, is because he talked about the gentleman losing his bag. Another thing that I recalled is my clients who carry all of their possessions on their back, to get into the Justice Center, have to go through security. And the sheriffs there are, for the most part, pretty nice, but there's an occasional one that's not so much. The bags often contain a fork or a knife. Those can't come into the Justice Center. So, and they can't be put in the little planters out front. There's signs there that say, abandoned property, we'll take it. They won't take it at the front and hold it so you can get it on the way out. That's another rule. And so if I'm lucky enough to get there at the same time as my clients, I'll, if I can, just get their stuff into my car so they don't have to deal with it. But that's another issue, a minor issue maybe, but a major issue for somebody who's got everything they own on their back.
Another question?
My name is Frank Sturgill. I've got 2 items I'd like to bring up. One is when the city expends money to the nonprofits or any construction projects or any major expenditures, why is it not ensuring that homeless are being hired on those projects? That's really exploiting the homeless. I've tried to talk to the Bridge House, and I propose to train their clients, about 10 of their clients, to do things like on the Ready to Work day shelter project. I propose to train them to do scheduling, estimating, smaller things that they can handle, and then have a marketable skill after the project. So they would get a paycheck, probably get them enough to get them off the street, and then and a marketable skill afterwards for probably about 10 people. And not only was I ignored about that, Rich House decided to hire college buddies instead, less qualified, and I got nothing out of it, and neither did any of the clients of Rich House. So something needs to be done about making sure that employment is included when the city expends money like that. And my other question is on the camping ban. It seems to me that it violates the 9th Amendment, because everybody has the right to have a blanket over themselves or some way to cover themselves at night, except for homeless people. The 9th Amendment is an everyday right, something that a person does every day. And the government doesn't go and take it away. But only the homeless are allowed to, can have that right taken away. I'm just wondering what the attorneys would think on that. How could that not possibly be a Ninth Amendment right to have a blanket over yourself? Throw that.
I think that the fights in court have been successful, not on that front, on the front of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual. And now, if you've seen the most recent one from the federal district court in Colorado, Judge Aguayo, about the panhandling and about your First Amendment right in terms of free speech. And so I think that's where we're being successful, and we want to push on those fronts because that's a brand new decision that says basically these panhandling ordinances are unconstitutional because they are sort of violating our free speech rights. And so yeah, that with the Eighth Amendment, that's where our successes are, and I think that's where we should continue pushing with all of the different legal teams, the ACLU, criminal defense attorneys, and so forth, the Department of Justice. That's where we need to keep fighting.
Despite the successes some have had with the Eighth Amendment, we didn't. We challenged the camping ban years ago on Eighth Amendment grounds and essentially right to travel grounds, and lost, not surprisingly, in the municipal court. An appeal from the municipal court goes to the district court of the same county or district. We lost in the Boulder District Court, and with the help of the ACLU, we did petition for cert to the Colorado Supreme Court. And you need to get 3 justices to agree to take the case, and we got 2. So it wasn't reviewed by the Colorado Supreme Court. We're trying again, frankly. The CU legal aid students filed a challenge again recently, not surprisingly, lost in the municipal court, lost the trial that was associated with that case just recently. And so I think they're looking at whether to now appeal again in light of some of the changes that have happened. The Department of Justice's friend of the court brief, I think it was, in Idaho, and the HUD position to see if maybe we can get that 3rd justice and get a decision out of the Colorado Supreme Court. I will say on that point that I find it a little disheartening that Tom Carr, the city attorney, feels that it's necessary to wait until the Supreme Court rules on that issue. So I think that throws it back in the council's hands to look at it, and I appreciate what I just heard, which is that this may be something that the council starts looking at.
One more quick comment. Denver city attorney quickly put out a press release after Judge Aguayo's decision on the panhandling ordinance violating the First Amendment to say we will not be issuing tickets under this. It's going to cease and desist on that. And so you might want to look at Boulder to see whether or not, in terms of your aggressive panhandling, should also stop.
Boulder did the same thing in light of Judge Aguayo's decision. We also stopped enforcing, and we'll probably get at some point in the next council an ordinance that cleans that up. I wanted to come back to a couple points here. Yeah, I am very interested in the tiny homes thing, so I forgot to answer this, and the next question reminded me. Again, this community, the way things get done in Boulder is communities organize and push, and that's really the kind of focus. How do you get council's attention as you do what you're doing? You try and grow the circle. On tiny houses, there's 2 enormous opportunity sites right now. The city owns 5-acre Pollard site at the corner of 30th and Pearl, and we're about to buy the almost 9-acre hospital site. So on issues like that, I think that is right. The time is ripe for a conversation about how to do that, because the idea of tragedy of the commons is real, but if you can have an organized area where a housing arrangement is managed, even if it's temporary, even if it's passed through, that's the way it's going to get done. It's going to get done in a way that doesn't have huge negative impacts on others in the community, but is also managing for sanitation, managing for violence, or just making sure that those kinds of negative impacts are well controlled. And so now is the time to have. I can't remember a time in Boulder when the city owned sites that were this significant, and it's a time for the community to make their wishes known. And I like your idea, particularly on that subject of the extent to which you can do training and employment of unhoused people, but unhoused people who are on the track. Where, I mean, that's the rub, is finding the people who want to be out of the situation. Not everyone does want to be out of the situation. So, you've got to pick and choose your people who would be helping you with that, I think.
Ron, do you have a question? Identify yourself.
My name is Ron Chase, and I'm homeless. Don't look like it. It's the way I like to be. Okay, but I appreciate all of you for what you say and all that. Put this on the next ballot. End it. Seriously. Because repeat offenders back and forth and back, I've seen this since 2008. Where I go tonight, you'll never find me, ever. I disappear in those shadows, I'm gone. See you bye. I haven't had a ticket in 5 years. I don't partake in what's going on downtown because I see it every single day. And, the smoking ban, I think it's unconstitutional. You take away our rights to choose, right? So let me ask you this, of the tickets that are handed out for smoking during the festivals, how many tickets are handed out for people who smoke and the tourists and the beer drinking tourists? How many of those tickets were handed out? 0. For 3 seasons in a row, I've been watching out down at the park quite a bit. I'm not mad, don't get me wrong. I am not mad, Sam, not by 1 minute. But I find it unfair to pick on the homeless people. Well, because you're unhoused, you don't have property, you don't have this, you don't have that. Well, why can't we? I work for Donington Construction. I'm handicapped physically. I have a physical problem with my leg, and it's hospital caused. Okay, but I work. I can't bounce around the tractor all day because then my leg will swell up to enormous size, about ready to bust. It's all for information. But anyway, I just wanted to make my comments to thank you guys, every single one of you, for what you're doing. But, stop with the hundreds of billions of dollars in research and this and that and studies. Stop this.
Thank you.
If you stop this now, then everything should probably be okay. Can we have some more portalets in the parks so we don't have to go urinate in the bushes? Okay, I'm 56 years old and my bladder lets go. I don't like to go behind a tree and look behind my bush. I'll make sure the cops ain't here. Is there any cops in the room? No, there's no cops, thank God. And then do my thing. A lot of problems come from college kids, not homeless. College kids defecate and destroy city property. It's not the homeless. The homeless are already gone to go sleep. College kids are out to 2 o'clock in the morning yelling and screaming up and down the streets. I mean, you can hear them for miles, throwing up everywhere. That's not the homeless. And Boho, I'm a former Boho staff member. I quit Boho recently because I just got tired of it. We hosted 282 people one time in a church. We had 4 backup churches to back it up. We did a lot. We saved a lot of lives. Nobody died that night. The faith-based communities are fine and dandy, but why can't you have something more, realistic? If you cut this out, there'll be a lot less problems in the city, I guarantee it. But you got to have more restrooms around the parks. I know the parks need money to, you know, keep going with their facilities and all that. A Porter Lake does not cost a lot of money. I'm serious. Put this on the ballot. Get rid of it. Also put on the ballot, get rid of the smoking ban as well. That's unconstitutional. Takes away my right to choose. And I feel like, you know, if you take away my right to choose, then maybe like one officer told me, if you don't like it here in Boulder, get out. And I said, I'm a Boulder resident since 1959. Or do you live in Boulder? And he goes, no. I said, then don't tell me how to live in my city. Period. You know, but anyway.
Thanks, Ron.
That's it. I gotta go hike.
I know. I've actually worked with Ron. We've done some.
Yes, we have.
We've worked together.
Yes, we have.
So he can work.
Yeah, work.
So
I'm just going to let our panelists reintroduce themselves one last time with their contact information. For those of you who've listened in, you've been listening to KGNU Boulder, Denver, and the topic of conversation has been housing availability and the criminalization of homelessness. And so I want to just ask our panelists to reintroduce themselves and give their contact information one more time again in case you caught a piece of this and it's piqued your interest in what they've said or how you can find out more information.
David Harrison, criminal defense attorney here in town, office at 2305 Broadway, corner of Broadway and Mapleton, and website millerandharrison.com.
Good evening, I'm Leanne Wheeler, and I would be remiss, I'm going to take a liberty here to mention the Fort Lyon Residential Treatment Program over in Los Animas County as a stellar, innovative way to repurpose public land and allow for individuals who are experiencing a health difficulty, whether that's mental health or physical health, with a priority on veterans who are in despair, to police themselves, create community for themselves, and in fact, reach into themselves and do the thing that brings them joy in life. And so if you have an opportunity to travel to that part of the state, please do. I am willing to take you and tour that facility, as it is in fact a benchmark for how we might do this innovative work any and everywhere else in the state of Colorado. You can reach me at Leanne, Leanne, at WheelerAdvisoryGroup.org. You can also reach me through MDHI at mdhi.org. My contact information is there as I sit on that board of directors. And as was mentioned earlier, I am the vice president of that board. My phone number is 303-995-8010, 303-995-8010. Those in attendance at the forum, I'm happy to forward a card to.
And I'm Nancy Aruem, faculty at the University of Denver, Stern College of Law. My students, Ellie Zweibel and Allie Moore, are here tonight. You can reach us with the Homeless Advocacy Policy Seminar. You can reach us at my email address, N as in Nancy, R as in Roger, U, A, N as in Nancy, at law.du.du, denveruniversity.edu. Look for our policy report to support the Colorado Homeless Bill of Rights at the end of 2015, early 16. And I hope that you all support that legislation.
Sam Weaver, Boulder City Council. I want to thank everybody who was on the panel tonight and our host. This was an excellent conversation. The city's website is www.bouldercolorado.gov. My email address with the city is weavers@bouldercolorado.gov. And I look forward to where this journey will take us.
And I'm Ken Miller. I've been wearing the hat as the facilitator of this conversation this evening on behalf of KGNU. But I also happen to sit on the board of the Boulder County 10-year advisory board, 10-year plan to end homelessness. And I wanted to mention that, like a lot of these human resource council and other these boards, public is you can come as a member of the public and sit in on these board meetings, and there's a public comment session for a few minutes, like there would be at a city council meeting. We do as a board appreciate input from the community. So if you ever want to come and sit in on a 10-year plan session or forward questions to us, I can be reached at my email of ken@projectrevive.com and can forward any of those pertinent questions or comments onto the 10-year planning board. But once again, thank you for your participation, and thanks again to Hope Church Boulder for hosting this panel here tonight. So thank you all for coming.
Just a postscript. I've got some handouts if anybody would like them. These were from the study session. They're just the presentation slides.
Yeah, one other thank you to Darren O'Connor has been very integral and